What was your interest on drugs? Why did you start studying that?
Yeah, so I started studying drugs because first of all, I came from a community that was poor in resources. So it would be like the favelas here. And I was told that the problems that faced our community were there because of drug addiction. So I thought that I wanted to help my community and solve the problem of drug addiction, so I started studying drugs. Studying the effects of drugs on the brain, I figured that if I could learn how the brain caused addiction, I could cure drug addiction. And if I could cure drug addiction, I could solve the problems of my community. Of course, that was naive and short-sighted and wrong. And so now I have a different perspective, but that's how I got involved.
Well, I'll do something a little bit different right now. I'll tell you some sentences, and you tell me if this is true or if this is a myth. 1. Marijuana is a gateway drug. Myth or true?
If you continued the sentence and said marijuana is a gateway drug to the White House, presidency of the U.S. president, to the U.S. presidency, then that would be true, right? So the last 3 presidents of the United States all smoked marijuana before becoming president. So we can say that marijuana is a gateway drug to the White House. So it's kind of a joke, but to show how absurd the notion that marijuana is a gateway drug, for example, to harder drugs, that's not true. It's true that many of the people, most of the people who do a drug like cocaine did marijuana first. That's true. But most of the people who do marijuana, the vast majority of people, never do cocaine. So it's not this thing that leads to this other thing. It's like saying that most of the people who do cocaine, they also did acai before doing cocaine. And so acai is a gateway drug to cocaine. It doesn't make sense, right?
One hit of crack cocaine and you are addicted.
That's false, of course. Most people who do crack cocaine are not addicted. Only about 20% of the people who do crack cocaine will become addicted. So the vast majority, 80% or more, never become addicted.
Legalizing drugs will increase the number of users.
For example, we've legalized alcohol. There are more users. Between 1920 and 1933, in the United States, alcohol was illegal. Now that it's legal, we have more users of alcohol. So we have more users. Okay, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem. The way that we're regulating the drug now, banning it, prohibition, is causing far more problems. And so if we ever talk about legalizing drugs, we have to think about it in comparison to what's happening now.
Drugs are so dangerous that make you incapable of rational choices.
Yeah, so of course that's false, because like you and I have been having this conversation, I hope I've been rational, and I certainly am a drug user. So, and I'm a professor, and I do these things that people depend on me. I have children, just like most drug users. So that's just, and when we think about leaders of nations and presidents, like our presidents in the United States, they all take drugs. I mean, they are prescribed medications, like sleeping pills are sedatives. There's powerful sedatives. They take stimulants like amphetamines, which are similar to cocaine and those sorts of drugs. They need to make rational choices, and they do. Well, they do, most presidents, except our current president, but that's a whole other story.
Let's talk a little bit about your experiment in the lab, talking about the ones that they used to do in the 60s with the rats, and what you've discovered, and then how you did it with people later.
Yeah, so I think you're talking about the experiments where when you put rats in an isolated environment, an environment that's deprived of any stimulation, and then you also give them a choice to take a drug. And what you find is that the rat will take more of the drug, and in some cases, particularly when it's intravenous, they can press a lever to receive intravenous injections, they will kill themselves. But then, when you put that same rat in an environment with other rats and toys and sweet treats and those sorts of things, they almost never take much of the drug. And so what that tells us is that environmental enrichments or alternative options decrease drug use. And so what we did was we brought people, humans, into the lab, and humans who were cocaine users, crack cocaine users, or methamphetamine users. And what we did was we presented them with different choices. Like no choices, when they have no choices, they almost always take drugs. But when you present them with something like increasing amounts of money, they take the money. And so again, it replicates the rat studies, and it tells us that people need attractive alternatives if you want them not to engage in a certain behavior, like taking drugs.
And let's go back to the 80s in the US. I've watched in the 13th Amendment, the documentary, right? And they said about the Ronald Reagan government and the policy of just say no to drugs, and the difference that they used to make with the cocaine user and the crack user. They used to have longer sentences, and that's it. What do you think of that policy? And are they still doing that now in the US?
Yeah, so the policy that you talked about is the policy that came about in 1986, and it was extended in 1988. Now, crack and powder cocaine are the same drug, but in the 80s, people were speculating or saying that they were different drugs. They were saying that crack was a lot more dangerous, more deadly. They're the same drug. Everyone knows this today. But in the 80s, people were saying that they weren't. So what happened was, the law said that if you get caught with small amounts of crack cocaine, you have to go to jail for a minimum sentence of 5 years. And oftentimes it's more than 5. And in order to go to jail for the same amount of time with powder cocaine, you have to have 100 times more powder cocaine than that crack cocaine. What we saw with that law was that the law was primarily enforced in black communities. I'll give you an example. Los Angeles, LA, California is a diverse community. Lots of black people, white people, Latino people, lots of people. Not one white person was convicted under that law in Los Angeles in 1992. And then when we look at the law throughout the history of the law to now, more than 80% of the people who were prosecuted under the law were black. And so that meant that they were going to jail for longer periods and so forth. The law is still in effect today, except that powder cocaine violations, crack cocaine violations are treated 18 times more harshly than powder cocaine violations, about 100. But in 2010, it changed from 100 to 1 to 18 to 1. So it's still wrong, still bad, still inappropriate in terms of what the science says. So it's in effect today, and we all have been saying it's wrong. But since it primarily impacts black people, poor people, the law hasn't really changed that much.
Racism. You have a lot of passages through the book about it. But then there is one that it's really important because you start a chapter with this, still just a nigga. And then you quote James Baldwin, which is a great author. He said, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. Why did you choose this sentence of this great author to start a chapter in your book?
Yeah, you know me too well. I love that quote, and it brings me great joy that you pulled that quote out. But it also brings me great sadness because on one, the quote is great because many of us in our societies, many people, doesn't matter whether you're black or white, whatever you are, it doesn't matter. Many of us, and most of us, are not conscious. So in that quote, James Baldwin said, if you are relatively conscious, you and black, you will be in a rage all the time. You are in a rage because of the bullshit that you see in your societies, and no one seems to care. When you see that disproportionate numbers of poor black people are going to jail and you know it's unfair, and everybody's walking around like it's cool, like nothing's wrong, this injustice. And then those same people praise people like Martin Luther King or the greats who were fighting for this kind of justice, and they don't fight for it. It just makes you angry. And that's, but we have to contain our anger in order to be in these spaces to try to convince people. But outside of these spaces, when you have your free time, you're enraged. So thank you for pulling out that quote.
Yeah.